Hello there and welcome back to another review. So today we're going to be having a look at Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, which was a joint production between Shaw Brothers and Hammer. Kung Fu, horror, all going on in this movie, made in 1974 and starring Peter Cushing and David Chiang. Now this film did not do well, and when I say it didn't do well, I think it was a complete and utter financial failure. This was a film I remember watching ages and ages and ages ago, but what is most interesting about this movie is that it, like I say, it crosses over the horror element from Hammer with the Shaw Brothers action that was happening at the time. I say made in 1974, so you could argue it's a relatively sort of early-ish kung fu movie. Obviously, with the kung fu horror sort of hybrid, obviously something that would become much more popular in the 80s, largely thanks to sort of Sammo Hung with the Mr. Vampire movies, and sort of, I know he didn't direct them, but he produced them. But obviously the most obvious one, Encounters of the Spooky Kind. I guess the idea was to do like a full-on horror kung fu mashup with this film. Now I'm reviewing the Western release of this movie with the shorter runtime. I think during film it was, I think it was Roy Ward Baker, the director, who directed the dialogue and standard scenes, where I think Chang directed the action with Liu Kao-lung choreographing here. Now I have a bit of a soft spot for this movie, or at least I did back in the day, because I just absolutely loved everything with horror and kung fu. As soon as, like, if it was horror and kung fu, I was always on board, and I always thought them two sort of genres worked really well together. So this happening as early as 1974, I really did enjoy it when I first saw it. As I say, there is a longer version of this movie, but I'll be reviewing the shorter runtime. So it was really up my street. I think this was actually Peter Cushing, a lot sort of last themed Dracula movie. The cut I'm reviewing here is around 90 minutes in length, but I'm right in saying I think the Hong Kong cut is about 20 minutes longer, I believe, at about 110 minutes. I could be wrong, but I think it's definitely much longer. I think due to the language barriers between the Eastern and Western actors, I'm pretty sure the film didn't have the most smoothest of all productions. It doesn't, if you can't all, if you're not understanding that well, and there's a bit of a language barrier there's going to be a bit of a, tiny bit of a troubled production. But I think it's one of them movies, like, if you like kung fu and you like your horror, especially 70s horror and kung fu, then you would definitely have a lot to enjoy here. Although the film didn't do too well, it's one of them movies where you were like, wait, did Hammer and Shaw Brothers make that movie? I didn't even know about that. I remember when a friend of mine showed it to me, it's like, no, it's Peter Cushing and David Chang, like, there's kung fu and it's Peter Cushing, it's a Shaw Brothers movie, and I was like, no, like, you're joking, surely. I didn't believe it, and then I checked it out, and I loved it when I first saw it. I absolutely really did enjoy the movie. But it really is good, and the answer is, I think you get exactly what you pay for with this movie. You get old school kung fu, Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, you get Dracula, you get the undead, some quite cool visual looking images, especially with the undead and people rising from the grave, and you have a film overall that by and large is very, very entertaining. And I think it's one, I can't say it enough, but if you like horror, you like kung fu, for an early entry in that sort of genre, that hybrid genre, then it's, for what it does it quite well. Yes, it has its flaws, but what do you expect from a movie that sets out to be a horror kung fu mashup? And to that end, as I say, accomplishes its goals really well. Another one of them late night movies that I recorded off TV. I think originally there was going to be a sequel to this movie. I think they was going to go to India or something like that, or India was spoke about or something like that. But due to the film's poor performance, and of course, that never happened. David Chang was pretty much sort of Shaw Brothers' sort of main star at this point, or one of them. He was, he's in a lot of movies, but I was hoping actually this movie was going to be in one of the Shaw Brothers box sets that, where I'm trying to go. I've been through the first one. I was really hoping they would have put it in with one of the Shaw Brothers box sets from Arrow Video, but unfortunately it wasn't the case. Especially if they could have put in both cuts of the film, that would have been awesome. But I don't know if it's where Hammer owns some of the rights or something. I guess it can't be classified as a full-blown Shaw Brothers movie. I'm not too sure. So we open in Transylvania. I think it's 1804 is the year where we're at, and we watch this Taoist priest type monk approach Dracula's castle, and he's called Ka, and so he is the high priest of the seven golden vampires in China. Dracula awakens, played by, I think it's John Forbes-Robertson. is the guy who plays Dracula in this movie, though he's hardly in it. You hardly see him. So basically, Carr has lost his power and wants Dracula to help him awaken the vampires, as the people and the village aren't scared of him no more, and his power is sort of fading. So he's like, sort of, come on, look, nobody's scared of me anymore. Help me out, Dracula. Please just help me out. I need to install some fear into these people because his power's sort of fading. Dracula sort of gets on board, but he wants to become Carr as he has grown bored of his castle, so he takes over Carr's body, basically. You just have to love the lighting and the sets, in this movie. Really all just part of the charm of it all. So Dracula, he just basically stares at Carr for a bit and then sort of becomes him. And like, all he has to do is sort of stare at him, look at him, and then he's become Carr. That's what he's become. So then we go forward about 100 years to Chiang, where Van Helsing is like giving a lecture at this university about vampires, and tells the story of a farmer who goes out of his village to fight the vampires, as his village is haunted and cursed by the golden vampires. And I say it's all about this village. For some reason, this one village is just, it's vampire ridden. It's the vampires just love this village for some reason. So although David Chang plays the lead, he also plays the farmer here too. In this like flashback, he goes to Carl's residence where these women are tied and shackled and surrounded by the 7 vampires. After this runs, I absolutely love the bodies coming up from the graves and the skull faces of his men and the way it is filmed. There is something incredibly eerie about the antagonists in the movie, and even with the soundtrack as well, some of the musical cues that are used. Very eerie, very spooky looking. Reminded me in some ways a bit of Evil Dead 3, actually. Like you have the undead on horseback with swords and things like that. So he manages to get his hands on one of the golden medallions that he places near this Buddha statue, and he gets his throat cut. One of the vampires gets burnt as he tries to grab the sort of medallion. So for the most part, there's not actually 7 vampires. So after telling the story, knowing the class believes Van Helsing, we meet his son Leyland, played by Robin Stewart, I think is his name. Si Ching, David Chang's character, breaks in to see the professor as he was at the lecture, and he actually believes the legend, and nobody in the class actually believes Van Helsing, but David Chang's character actually does. His grandfather, we find out, was the guy in the story, and it was his ancestral village, and wants to take Van Helsing back to the village with him for help, and shows him the 7th medallion that was placed on the Buddha. So Leyland, after trying to chat up Vanessa Buren, gets attacked by some mobsters, but is saved by the rickshaw operator, one of them being Liu Kao Wing. As I say, it's really weird seeing like people like Liu Kao Wing and David Chang and that right next to Peter Cushing. It's still a bit weird watching it now. Obviously, Shaw Brothers, big studio, Hammer, big studio, let's team up. But as I say, you see Liu Kao Wing here, who plays like the bowman, the other operator being an axeman, and they are like Ching's brothers, and he has like 4 others and a sister. So Vanessa is loaded, this rich woman. She agrees to fund the expedition. Of course, she wants to come along. Leyland is in trouble with the Tongs, who are sort of local bad dudes. And Leyland's, they've only been there a short while, and Leyland's already in trouble. Leyland. Local bad dudes. And Van Helsing is curious, so they all decide to go on this trip, right? It's pretty much like becomes sort of a road movie. Which is quite cool in itself. They leave Chungking at first light and haven't been on the road for 5 minutes. They get ambushed, so cue a fight. They literally set off, and it takes literally minutes for them to have a kung fu fight. Now, all these scenes with the fighting are cool, but what is so annoying and distracting is that the Western actors, when David Chang and doing all these fight scenes and everything like that, when this happens, the Western actors are just standing there like so spare, like odd, they have nothing to do when there is a kung fu fight, and just have to watch and look shocked as the Shaw Brothers basically do their thing. And it's quite distracting actually, because I'd say they just have to stand there while, like, obviously Chang Chi directed these scenes, but it's very odd that they do join in a little bit as sort of some of the fights go on, but for the most part they're just standing there. Don't expect any major groundbreaking fight scenes in this movie either. I mean, they are serviceable, and you have to remember, like I mentioned, this was 1974, so the Kung Fu movie, sort of as it become known, was still very much finding its feet, or in the process of just working out what it wants to be. Obviously, after the passing of Bruce Lee in 73, they were still experimenting, trying new things and that kind of thing. So Cheng introduces Van Helsing to his siblings. We have the twin swordsman, a mace wielder, a spear, axe, bowman, and his sister. Cheng wants Van Helsing as he fought the head vampire. It's quite amazing, actually, that David Chang puts in a fine performance here. David Chang is absolutely, he's really good in the movie. In many ways, he sort of carries the film more than sort of what Peter Cushing does. He puts in a great performance. His English is more than okay. And dare I say, him and Peter Cushing actually have some chemistry when on screen together. They seem to work really well, and I can imagine probably off camera, behind the scenes, they were probably, probably got on really well. It seemed like they did in terms of when they're on screen together anyway. So with Cheng doing whatever it takes to get the professor to the village so he can sort of aid him, basically. There are moments where it looks like it was cut too early or a scene was missing at one point. It sort of fades in and out of nowhere to the vampires terrorising the village and assaulting the women and trying to take them. As I said, this is with the trouble with the version I'm reviewing. I will review the longer cut, but so it seems like a lot of scenes are cut very short, or it seems like sometimes, that ended a bit too quickly or whatever. So I think this version that I reviewed, I think it's about 90 minutes, around there. So Van Helsing advises that a crucifix will be no good against the vampires here, as it will be the image of Buddha they're afraid of. And of course, the old wooden stake always works wonders. You always have to have a wooden stake handy. So basically, there are only 6 vampires now, and they want the medallion back to recreate the 7th. So it's called Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires, but for most of the film, other than the flashback, there's really actually only 6 vampires the whole time, and they're trying to recreate the 7th. So Leland spends most of his time trying to chat up Cheng's sister. That's all he's trying to do at this point. Dracula, who is now Carr, and the fellow vampires bite into the woman they have captive. It's also implied the wealthy Vanessa has a thing for Cheng, as she keeps on looking after him, hanging around him, and she even tucks him in at night. So they try and get some romance going along with some of our characters. On their journey, they go to stay in this cave. Helsing doesn't like the atmosphere, and Leland is just bitching and moaning, saying they could be anywhere. And the Leland character does get annoying. He really, probably my least favourite character in the movie. It's like he might as well just not be there. He's bitching and moaning. He's like, we could be anywhere. He does. So yeah, what also lets the film down a bit is that for a horror kung fu movie extravaganza, there is an awful lot of sort of quiet and sort of silent moments where the film, whether it's little action or not a lot's being said, the script is okay, but it's a very, overall, for what is meant to be a massive mashup of these two genres, it's quite a quiet film. It's not sort of loud and necessarily as full on as one would expect. So these bats in the cave are actually the vampires and start attacking them with their swords after they transform, and these reincarnated undead zombie villagers come in. It's one of them movies that with a bit more planning and a bit more care and attention, I think this could have been a classic. It really could have been must see. You must check this film out. I mean, all the ingredients are there for it to be one. It just doesn't, unfortunately, it's not just quite as classic as it should be. So it turns into this massive brawl inside the cave, and all Vanessa can do is stand there and lean, and for some reason none of the undead or vampires are attacking Van Helsing. As I say, the Western actors just usually have to stand there, just as the kung fu's happening, and Vanessa just stand there having a lean. He tells them to strike at their heart, which causes the vampires to crumble and deflate, which does look really cool the way they film it. When I talk about this film having cool things in it, the soundtrack's very good, the imagery's very good, and some of the practical effects are really cool as well. Even Leland gets in on the scuffle a little bit, would you believe? Even Leyland gets involved, in the ruckus, which So one of the vampires in whites gets stabbed, does a black backflip, then starts to dissolve too. So after Van Helsing tortures one of them, and they all just leave, deciding the undead have had enough, basically. They killed 3 of them, 3 remain, so even though it's called 7 Golden Vampires, we don't know it as I say, it's not 7 for very long. And what's weird is that at this point, Ching is like ready to give up, right? David Chang's character, he's sort of ready to give up. Now, up to this point, he was the most determined guy you would ever meet, right? He knew what he wanted. He was a just man and everything like that. And he's just ready to give up. He's not sure how much more his siblings can they can take, which I thought was a bit out of character. As his character above any of the others he was throughout this point to this point in the movie, he was the most committed. He was the most determined. He was the most right. I've got to do this. This is my journey. This is what I'm meant to do. And then he's just like, I just give up. But Van Helsing gives him like a pep talk. They find a sword and mask like near the shrine, and Van Helsing is like, the legend is true. Did the cave and the alarm bells and the undead attacking you, was that not a sign that the legend probably might be true? But now he's like, the legend is true. So no sooner are they in the village and they start digging like this trench. Leyland has a kiss with Ching's sister. That's all he really seems interested in. Leyland, he's either moaning, doesn't get involved much with the action scenes, and he's just trying to just get himself laid, basically. So Car makes the dead rise, and we'll say visually this part of the movie is awesome. It is really awesome, and it's actually quite spooky at the end of the movie, with the skull faces, the music, and the green lighting. So they attack the village, and as always, Leyland and Van Helsing just stand there watching at the remaining villagers and Ching do battle. The trench gets set on fire, and I will be fair, Van Helsing does join in on the fight at last. I mean, this is what I'm saying, when it's like this village, why this village? Why are they just obsessed with this village? Why is Car like sort of, I want to dominate this? I know it's not Car, it's meant to be Dracula at this point, but they are obsessed with this village. Why is it so special? I understand Carl made a name for himself there, but why would Dracula, who is now Carl, just want to settle on scaring this village? Why not other places? Or even from the villagers' point of view, couldn't they have just moved and gone to live somewhere else if it's being terrorised by vampires? Might be like, actually, we're being terrorised by the undead all the time. Should we go and maybe look at some new properties and things like that? But for whatever reason, they just got a thing. Carl, Dracula, and the villagers, it's just all congregating in this one place. So Vanessa gets a bit and bites Ching. He forces her into like a spike, then himself. So Ching actually does die as well. Did they really need to kill him? Like the most skilled fighter there. But the idiot Leyland survives. He survives, but Ching doesn't. A skilled kung fu practitioner who knows sort of the legend of the vampires. Leyland survives, but Ching doesn't. Loads of his siblings get massacred. Luo Kao Weng actually doesn't know. I think he survives, if I recall. So after that mad scene, his sister gets taken. Leyland goes after and is saved by Van Helsing from one of the vampires. Carr turns back into Dracula, who then starts slapping Van Helsing, and he stabs Dracula right away. There's no fight at the end of this movie. There's no rumble. There's no massive showdown between Van Helsing and Dracula. He sort of comes to just sort of... It's all over in like 5 seconds. The end of it, between the two. Like, you've got your main hero, your main villain, and it's over in like, it's literally seconds. And we have a long shot of him like decaying, and it goes on for ages, this decaying shot. It really does go on, and sort of that's it. Van Helsing sort of walks out, but there's still a lot to enjoy here. And if you're fans, like if you are a fan of, like I say, spooky encounters, anything from Sammo Hung in the 80s, in that horror sort of kung fu, Mr. Vampire, Dead and the Deadly, that kind of thing, then you're gonna have there's a lot to be enjoyed here. And it's almost, like I say, it's sort of, you could argue it's almost a precursor to that, with, like I say, that kung fu horror hybrid. And it's a shame it's not maybe as classic as it could have been or should have been. As I mentioned, all the ingredients are there. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't necessarily hit the target on every single one of them. But I still thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved it back in the day, and it's definitely one worth checking out. So thank you very much indeed for watching. Hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll see you again soon.
Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory.